Chadi, thank you so much for sharing that initial intro into this very famous case that you've been involved in. I'd like to ask a couple of follow-up questions from that. Firstly, what is the history of glyphosate from your research?
Yeah, so glyphosate was actually discovered originally in the 50s by Swiss chemists and subsequently was patented by Monsanto in the 70s when a couple of scientists that worked for Monsanto discovered that it has these capabilities. It's a mineral chelator, and it does have the capabilities of killing weeds. It affects a particular enzyme that is present in plants. Monsanto patented, and they basically added surfactants to it and water and other soluble chemicals, and it became Roundup. Surfactants are basically like foamy materials that usually makes the glyphosate more sticky. So it gets more sticky on the weeds and does its job. If it affects the skin, there's more absorption because of the surfactants. So the composition of all of this made Roundup. But glyphosate was discovered originally in the 1950s. Roundup is not glyphosate alone. It's glyphosate plus surfactant plus other material.
So there's some sort of a mechanistic action of the chemical structure of the glyphosate plus the surfactant that makes up Roundup, which targets plants in some ways almost like a herbicide to kill them.
Right. So basically, when Monsanto introduced Roundup Ready seeds, basically what they were able to do using the GMO, they were able to make sure that that enzyme with the genetically modified process, the enzyme that the Roundup usually targets or glyphosate targets is not present in these crops and the seeds. So then the Roundup or glyphosate is affecting the weeds, but not affecting the crops. So you're able to grow these, the crops and harvest the corn and the soybean and everything. So that's really why the use of Roundup increased significantly after that. And guess who, by the way, manufactured Roundup Ready seeds? Monsanto.
Right. So you're creating almost a system where the Roundup or glyphosate plus surfactant wipes out all the vegetation, but these special type of seeds and crops that grow from these seeds are able to resist the Roundup. So thus reducing a lot of labor on the farm and whatnot.
Exactly.
And obviously patenting these seeds to make sure that there's no real viable option.
Exactly. But, if you think about it, now you're the same company that is manufacturing Roundup for the weeds and Roundup Ready seeds. So you're profiting either way. It's great.
And how long is this glyphosate being in our food system? So did you mention 1950s or something like that?
Well, I think it started really making its way more in the mid to late 90s, because that's really when it was being sprayed on all of the crops.
Mm-hmm.
And what I obviously focused on and what I read and researched and the topic of the trials I testified in was mainly in lymphoma, cancer, and glyphosate. But look, we should really ask ourselves, is it possible that some of the ailments that we are seeing in today's world may be related to the wide use of glyphosate and Roundup all over the place? It is the most used weed killer in the world. Billions have been sprayed all over. Once the Roundup Ready seeds became available, you could actually have the airplanes and just spraying all of the Roundup all over the cornfields, because you no longer fear that you're going to damage the corn, right? So I think it's there. There's a lot. We know it's in cereal, in bread, and everywhere. The question is it really causing additional issues, autoimmune diseases? Is it affecting the gut? Your podcast, is it causing gut leaky syndrome? And we have some data on that. Is this really affecting other things beyond cancer, which again have a lot of effects on illnesses and quality of life? I did not necessarily study that per se, but I know a lot of people that have really questioned this, and I think it's important to study it and investigate it.
Of course, and if you're just spraying it into the environment, it's going to get into waterways and
Oh, for sure.
into livestock, and it's just completely ubiquitous in the environment. So it's almost impossible to avoid. I take a walk down to my my local park, and probably once a month you've got the council workers and gardeners spraying. I'm sure it's Roundup or some sort of pesticide, weed killers, to kill the weeds. So it's so hard to avoid. What do we do?
It is very hard to avoid. I think there are two things that, well, first of all, I think the fact it's hard to avoid should not be an excuse that we should not have a solution. At some point, everybody smoked. I mean, everybody did. At some point, doctors smoked. They were on commercials. If you go right now and Google doctors' commercials on smoking, you're going to find one of them where they put doctors prefer Camel, the brand. I mean, in the hospital. So it was all over. It was sexy to smoke. It was on TV. It was ads, all of these things. And now we know it's bad for you, and you can still choose to smoke, but at least you know it's bad for you. So yes, it's ubiquitous, but we should have a solution. And I think there's a big opportunity here to actually, for some entrepreneur people, to come up with a different way of killing weeds without damaging the environment and without damaging people. I don't know what that is, but I think it's an opportunity for somebody who is innovative, who is whatever. I mean, maybe somebody from Australia, but really, I think it is important. There's a lot of hunger for this and lots of need for this. The other thing I would say, Kriben, is that Monsanto, the manufacturer of Roundup, has always argued that Roundup is safe because the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States of America, has said it is safe. And that is, I respectfully disagree with the EPA. I think they got it wrong. And if you look at the original documents, which I detail in the book, by the way, and I detail the documents from the EPA from the early 80s, the EPA said it was carcinogenic back in the 80s. And then they changed their position without any new data that they received. So I mentioned that because I think there's an opportunity for all of us as citizens to basically lobby and put some pressure on the regulatory agencies, whether they're in the US, in Australia, or everywhere. And these regulatory agencies then need to demand more from the manufacturers. They need to put some strict guidelines. They need to demand some more studies. And they need to make sure that they really put the safety of their citizens front and center.
100% agree, Chadi. And that's the beauty of capitalism, is that the consumer has the ability to influence the behavior of manufacturers by their wallets. Which products are you choosing? Is it choosing organic-based products? Is it choosing water-based products that have been tested for glyphosate? Whilst we're not going to completely eliminate glyphosate from the environmental exposures completely, like totally, just like with any chemical, dose level matters. So by reducing the dose levels that our bodies are exposed to, I can hypothesize that there would be some benefits in mitigating the risks of glyphosate using that strategy. So where do we go from here? I have to ask the question, the glaring obvious question that came to my mind is, why not just put your neck out there? I mean, it's you pretty much testifying against a behemoth, with endless amounts of resources. That was an extremely brave move.
Well, first of all, I had no idea what I was getting into. I literally had no idea. I did not even know how big this was going to be. I realized the impact. When I read the science, I became convinced, and I was able to read additional internal documents that were shared with me through the discovery process about Monsanto's behavior and about Monsanto's ghostwriting and about Monsanto's internal email communication. But I did not know how big this is going to be. And I want to make sure I'm clear that this was not just my effort. I mean, there was many other expert witnesses. I was the medical oncologist, but there were other expert witnesses, epidemiologists, toxicologists, statisticians, so other folks that were obviously part of the team. I did my part and they did their part, but ultimately it was a team that led to exposing the truth, in my opinion. Why I did this, like I said, I did not know it was going to be that big, but I'm glad I did. It was the right thing to do. And I can tell you, I didn't really think I was going to write a book about it. But eventually I did, because in one of the court testimonies, the Monsanto lawyer, when I was on the stand, he said, well, how come you did not, you don't go around the world and lecture about this and talk about this and tell people about this? And I said, I didn't know. I said, I wasn't sure it's allowed. I said, I'm an actively testifying expert. I don't think I'm allowed. He said, no, you are. I said, okay, then I'll do it. But I thought the best way to do it is to write a book to the public. Write a book not for doctors, not for lawyers, it's to the public. So the book is written in an easy to understand manner. It is not written for healthcare professionals or legal professionals. It's written for anybody who is interested in that topic. It's a story. Hopefully I was able to tell a story and educate people about what actually happened. I wasn't really trying to lecture people. This is not a textbook. This is a story. This is the story of the first 3 patients that took Monsanto to court, what happened in the courtroom, in depositions, in trial, what was the evidence. But it's really through my lens, because I tell people in the introduction, I'm not a legal expert. I'm not an environmentalist. I'm a doctor that took care of patients, and I want them to see what I went through, because I wasn't knowledgeable enough about this, and I take them through what I learned through the process, so they really know how I came to the conclusion that I came to, you know?
That's brilliant. I mean, it's so courageous. Even if you kind of stepped onto the landmine by accident, you kind of you found yourself in this position. But hats off to you, Chadi. That's so great. I really encourage people to get a copy of the book Toxic Exposure and just read about this this journey. And what's the timeline? When was the actual trials when you were testifying to the book release?
Yeah, the first trial was in the summer of 2018. It was big, Kribben. It was big. Everybody was there. It was all over the newspapers. It was on TV, on the Wall Street Journal, just everywhere. It was pretty big. It was the first trial ever. And at the time, by the way, for your listeners, at the time, Bayer was acquiring Monsanto. So Bayer, the large German pharmaceutical company, paid $63 billion to acquire Monsanto. And after they bought Monsanto and the deal closed in the fall of 2018 after the first trial, I think Bayer underestimated the power of litigation and the power of patience. They probably did not really appreciate what was going on, because their stocks went down by 2/3, and it's still down. So they've lost so much in market cap after the acquisition. They paid $63 billion. They lost a lot of market cap. The shareholders voted loss of confidence in the CEO of Bayer, who is gone right now. There's a new CEO that started about a month ago. So a lot of things happened. The Wall Street Journal called the acquisition one of the worst business deals. So all of this was happening. So you could imagine the publicity about these trials. And here I was, like, I didn't know how big this was. So this was the first trial, was in July 2018, and the verdict came out in August 2018. The second trial was a federal trial, was in federal court, and this was in March 2019. And the third trial was in state court also, and it was in May 2019. There continues to be additional trials, but the subject of the book were these 3 trials. And I started writing the book after that. It took me about 3 years to write, pretty much. And then obviously with COVID, things slowed down. So the book was released in February 2023, about 4 months ago. And I'm glad to see a lot of uptake, and a lot of folks are interested in it, because again, this is not a legal book or a medical book. It's a story about what happened in those 2 years, 2018, 2019.
Sounds fascinating. I think a lot of audience members would love to grab a copy of the toxic exposure and dig deep into this topic. And what is the estimated payouts and damages from these 3 trials with these?
So I'll have to tell you that these 3 trials led to a large settlement for over 100,000 patients for about $11 billion.
Oh.
This is the settlement, okay? And I don't know, obviously, how much each patient received, but that is the settlement. It's one of the largest product liability settlements in the United States history. The first trial, Johnson versus Monsanto, the verdict was $289 million. It eventually went down with appeal and everything. The second trial, Hardeman against Monsanto, was 85 million. It also went down with appeal, but interesting, Kribben, the Hardeman trial was the trial that Monsanto decided to take all the way to the United States Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court refused to listen to hear the trial. They said, no, we're not going to hear the trial. The third trial, the damages and the verdict was for $2 billion, $1 billion each patient. It was a couple, was an elderly couple, Alva Piliad and Alberta Piliad, and $1 billion each. So a lot of damages, a lot of money, plus lawyer fees, plus market cap, plus the payout. And Bayer to this day refuses to acknowledge that maybe this could cause cancer in some patients. I mean, they could just put a warning label and call it a day. But the reason they don't want to put a warning label is because it affects profit.
Wow. That is really unbelievable. And I think it's a perfect circular connection to what you said earlier. Health is the most important thing. It's priceless. So irregardless of whether these poor folks that have ended up in court to challenge this behemoth, they get a little bit of, quite a lot of money actually, but that doesn't give them your life back.
No.
It doesn't give you your life back. It's like the booby prize, you know. Your life's been destroyed, your health's been destroyed, but at the end of the day, you pretty much get a bit of money to keep your mouth shut. You know, that's what it comes down to. So hopefully this message can get out there and inspire people to make the right choices when it comes to their diet, what they're doing in their garden. You know, it's such an Aussie thing to grab a bottle of Roundup and spray it all over the place. I've been guilty of that myself, you know, being a bit slack in the garden and just finding all the weeds and just spraying them with Roundup. But, you know, there was a price.
If you have to do this, you must wear protective gear.
Yes.
Wear gloves, don't have it come to your skin. I mean, again, I think ideally you need to avoid it, but at least people need to be aware of the risk and make sure that they just don't get exposed their skin to it.
Completely agree. And the other factor, Chadi, is we don't fully understand what the flow-on effect is once we spray this into our gardens, into our soils. How does it affect the soil microorganisms, the soil microbiome? How is it affecting us long-term? How's it affecting our gut microbiome? You know, so it's just something I just think the wisest thing is just avoid it. Avoid it as much as possible. There's too many unknowns there, and it's really not worth the risk from what we're seeing, especially with this massive lawsuit. So
I agree.
Hopefully some sanity prevails in terms of the regulatory bodies and all that sort of jazz. I'm not holding my breath, but I think there's enough power in the hands of the consumers to speak with their wallets, to avoid the product, and eventually it's going to come off market. I'm certain of that with enough pressure.
I'm hopeful. I mean, Bayer did promise that they're going to pull Roundup off the US market for residential use in 2023. That will only be available to farmers and pesticide applicators. So for residential use, it's not going to be available, but it's still available. I can go to the store and I can find it right there. They have not pulled it out yet.
Mm-hmm. And then the other point is choosing organic. You know, it does cost more, but it costs a lot more to produce. You know, if you've got Roundup ready crops and you're spraying everything with Roundup, you know, your labor costs are far easier. The gross margins on your farm are a lot more attractive. So it's going to be cheaper to produce. But what is the price on your health? So guys, easy option. Choose organics. Choose companies that are not putting chemicals in your food. You know, I have a very simple ethos. It's called JERF. Just eat real food without all the crap and all the additives and chemicals and sprays and whatnot. Chadi, so thank you so much for coming into the podcast. You know, I think that's a perfect place to wrap up. People can go out and grab your book, Toxic Exposure, and explore this topic in far more detail and depth. You've put your 3 years of your life into making this masterpiece. So guys, highly encourage you going out and grabbing a copy of the book. In closing, I always like to ask my guests, what is the best thing you could do for your gut health today?
I think you mentioned it. I really think we need to avoid the chemicals, artificial chemicals that we have on the food when you are able to eat organic food. I do strongly believe, I didn't believe in that much when I first started. I think the more I learned, I've changed my mind, and there's nothing wrong in being educated and changing your mind and admitting that maybe there's a better way to doing things. I think when able get organic food, support these small farmer markets and these folks, not these large industrialized nations that think about farming. They don't have really your health at the center of their mind. What they have in their mind is, how do I make more money? That's what they care about.
Exactly. So beautifully said. And if people want to connect with you, how do they find you?
Feel free to, I'm on Twitter at Chadi Nabhan. I have a website, www.chadinabhan.com. They can follow me and check out my podcast, Healthcare Unfiltered. It is on every Tuesday morning, tackling healthcare topics. On Instagram, Chadi_Healthcare Unfiltered. And I put all of my podcasts on YouTube at Chadi and Healthcare Unfiltered. And they can also email me at chadinabhanoo@outlook.com. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chadi.
Preben, thank you. It's been an honor and a privilege to be with you.